That model suggests that the binging associated with bulimia is the result of the excessive dieting that sets people up for the binging. The lower your weight is compared to your normal weight, the more your body needs to binge. Now, can we use that information in treatment disorders? Okay, or treatment for these disorders. Let's start with drug treatments. There are no drugs that have shown themselves to be effective for anorexia. We've tried a lot. Now, some of the symptoms occasionally found in individuals who develop anorexia will respond to drugs, but the anorexia itself doesn't seem to respond. In bulimia, antidepressants seem to be modestly effective. Now, remember, many people with bulimia will develop a depression. The two tend to be comorbid. But even when you have people with bulimia who do not have depression, the antidepressants still seem to be modestly effective. So it's not just that it removes the depression and therefore the depression may be driving the binges and removing it reduces the rate of binging. It seems to be another factor. Unfortunately, when you stop the antidepressants, the positive effect stops as well. Okay, when we're treating anorexia, the most important thing is to prevent the person from dying. So if they're starving to death and some of their organs are starting to shut down because of the starvation, which is what happens. You don't die fast from starvation, you die slowly because of organs shutting down. You do whatever you have to do to prevent that from happening, and that's why it's very rare that people die from anorexia anymore, because we deal with those problems. We force feed them if necessary, which we can do through a tube to increase the weight rate and allow the person to be healthy. Saying to such an individual, okay, we want to understand why you're dieting so, is wasting time. You got to stabilize them medically. Cognitive behavior therapy has often been used to target the attitudes that are simply unreasonable. One such attitude is being thin is absolutely critical. I can't be beautiful unless I'm thin. I can't be successful unless I'm thin. All my value is based on how thin I am. Those are unreasonable things that you may not even be aware that you're saying to yourself, but you clearly are. Your behavior indicates it. So they need to be challenged. With anorexia, often there's a lot of involvement in the family and sometimes excessive over-involvement. Now, at one time, people suggested that was the cause of the anorexia. It probably is more likely to be an effect, but it can be toxic and can create other problems. Remember, we talked about over-involvement in the past for disorders like schizophrenia when we talked about expressed emotion. If your daughter is starving herself to death and you're worrying about her dying, you're going to be rather involved with her health. So it's important not to blame the parents for caring about the well-being of their daughter. Unfortunately, the prognosis for treating anorexia is not particularly good. It's much worse than for treating bulimia. Bulimia is successfully treated in many situations. And although it can come back, it typically is not as chronic as anorexia. Cognitive behavioral therapy is the treatment of choice for bulimia. It is the most effective treatment. Interpersonal psychotherapy. We've talked about this before. That's a psychodynamic treatment that, unlike traditional psychodynamic treatments, is short-term with a focus exclusively on better relationships, making new relationships, fostering them, repairing them when things go wrong. That's effective, but not quite as effective as cognitive behavioral therapy. And as I mentioned before, SSRIs show some promise. Unfortunately, the promise is only short-term. When you stop taking the SSRIs, often the symptoms tend to return. Now, just like there were some subtle differences between binge eating and bulimia, both involve binge eating, but only bulimia has compensatory behaviors, there are some subtle differences in the treatments. Cognitive behavior therapy, the same cognitive behavioral therapy that we use in bulimia, works well. And the interpersonal psychotherapy actually works about the same. Okay, it's not a bit weaker as it is with bulimia. And the medications, well, they don't seem to do much of anything, even the SSRIs, which reinforces the idea that binge eating and bulimia really are different disorders, even though the main symptom, the binging, is shared by both. Can we prevent eating disorders? Well, I don't have a good answer to that, but I know that we have made a lot of effort because we can predict who's at risk for eating disorders. In most cases, for example, it's only women. It's almost exclusively Caucasian women. It's almost exclusively middle to upper middle class Caucasian women. Successful Caucasian women. So if we can identify some younger people, successful women, for example, in these age groups and in these subcultures, and we know that they tend to be excessively interested in being thin, we can target those feelings and try to get them to accept the fact that you don't have to be thin to be happy. You don't have to be thin to be successful. And focus them on other things, such as being healthy rather than being thin. We can do that through education. We can do that through social support. Quite frankly, many of you will end up being parents. Some of you may already be parents. And you may have daughters who will experience this kind of pressure. And one of the things that you will want to do is to help them to have a more balanced view of the culture and of themselves, so that they will be less likely to develop eating disorders. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of a side trip here. This is not in your textbook, although it is in many textbooks. When we're talking about eating disorder, the truth is many of us eat too much, including myself. And I spend far too much time sitting in front of a computer, which I'm doing right now as I'm preparing these lectures so that they're available to you without having to come to a class. And unfortunately, a lot of the food that we have is processed to taste good. And the things that make it taste good are things like sugars and fats in much higher quantities than they occur in nature. And so it's not surprising that we tend to be overweight. What may be surprising are the numbers here. 30 years ago, we were talking about 12% of the population as being significantly overweight. 10 years ago, we were talking about more than a third of the population as being significantly overweight. And that number is up even more now. As I said, there's a lot of reasons for it. There are even perhaps good reasons in the sense that, okay, maybe it would be better if I were digging ditches because, well, I get a lot of exercise and wouldn't be overweight. But I don't want to dig ditches. I like what I'm doing. And if it means I sit in front of a computer, okay. And in the middle of the COVID-19 shutdown, I was fully employed because I could sit in front of a computer and do my work. Not sure there were too many people digging ditches at that time. So, obesity is a problem. It's a problem in our culture. It's a problem that is increasing. Most importantly, it is a problem that affects our health. Being obese increases your risk for all kinds of disease. Although I will point out, the research shows that being obese increases risk dramatically. Wild fluctuations from heavy dieting, where you lose the weight and then put it right back on, what we call yo-yo dieting, is much worse for your health than simply being obese. So some of the people that are trying to fight the obesity may actually be making their health worse. But you shouldn't be obese if you want to be healthy. And it's not just a matter of health. If you're obese, going upstairs is uncomfortable. Things that you would enjoy doing are just harder to do because you're obese. Okay, so we've established that obesity is common. It's becoming more common, that it has health risks associated with it. And of course, one becomes obese by eating more than your body needs. Now, your body could be designed to get rid of those calories. Just, literally get rid of them, expel them. But it doesn't do that. What your body does is it stores those calories, and it does it because in our evolutionary history, it was common to go sometimes days or weeks or longer without a whole lot of food because food was not readily available. Our evolutionary history favored those who could store the calories as excess weight that could then be drawn on during times when there weren't food. Now, look at this slide. One of the things that might strike you is, well, okay, this shows that there are cultural differences in the rates of obesity. Well, it does show that, but it shows something far more important, and that's what I want to focus on. This shows the number of people in 3 classes who have a BMI index above the 95th percentile and the 85th percentile. And notice, let's look at the first line. We have about 20% of Hispanic, about 25% of Black, and about 15% of Caucasian adolescents who are at or above the 95th percentile. Now, what's the definition of the 95th percentile? And how many people are above the 95th percentile? The definition is that you are at a level where 95% of the people are below your score. That means 5% are above. Okay, about 94% of our population is made up of Hispanic, Black, and Caucasians. There's some other groups in there, but a relatively small number. This suggests that 20% of the population is at the 95th percentile. That can't happen. One of 2 things is happening here. The people are either lying to you or they don't have a clue what 95th percentile means. Now, I don't think they're deliberately lying to you. But the people who treat individuals with eating disorders are at odds with the people who treat individuals who are obese. Because to get the attention of people that are overweight, they use terms like this. Okay, you're at the 95th percentile in terms of obesity, when you're actually at the 80th percentile. Okay, 80th percentile is not good. 95th makes it sound much more severe and urgent. In other words, you've got a group of people treating a very real problem, obesity, that exaggerate it in a way that makes people at risk for eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia to be at an even greater risk. This is not uncommon. Often, what you want to do for one problem is just the opposite of what you want to do for other problems. And if you only look at the world from the standpoint of one particular problem, you often have a very distorted view. And you often do things that help certain people while hurting others. This is an important thing to remember because the world is complicated. I've always thought that the phrase moderation in everything was a good guideline in that it tended to walk the line between diverse problems such as overeating and eating disorders.